far into the 18th century, and the descriptions of the ceremony by writers of that period present such a curious and interesting picture of ancient heathendom surviving in our own country that I will reproduce them in the words of their authors. The fullest of the descriptions is the one bequeathed to us by John Ramsay, Laird of Ochtertyre, near Crieff, the patron of Burns and the friend of Sir Walter Scott. He says, quote, "But the most considerable of the Druidical festivals is that of Beltane, or May Day, which was lately observed in some parts of the Highlands with extraordinary ceremonies. Like the other public worship of the Druids, the Beltane feast seems to have been performed on hills or eminences. They thought it degrading to him whose temple is the universe to suppose that he would dwell in any house made with hands. Their sacrifices were therefore offered in the open air, frequently upon the tops of hills, where they were presented with the grandest views of nature, and were nearest the seat of warmth and order. And according to tradition, such was the manner of celebrating this festival in the Highlands within the last 100 years. But since the decline of superstition, it has been celebrated by the people of each hamlet on some hill or rising ground around which their cattle were pasturing. Thither the young folks repaired in the morning and cut a trench, on the summit of which a seat of turf was formed for the company. And in the middle a pile of wood or other fuel was placed, which of old they kindled with tein eigen, i.e., forced fire or need fire. Although for many years past they have been contented with common fire, yet we shall now describe the process, because it will hereafter appear that recourse is still had to the tein eigen upon extraordinary emergencies. The night before, all the fires in the country were carefully extinguished, and next morning the materials for exciting this sacred fire were prepared. The most primitive method seems to be that which was used in the islands of Skye, Mull, and Tiree. A well-seasoned plank of oak was procured, in the midst of which a hole was bored. A wimble of the same timber was then applied, the end of which they fitted to the hole. But in some parts of the mainland the machinery was different. They used a frame of green wood of a square form, in the centre of which was an axle tree. In some places 3 times 3 persons, in others 3 times 9, were required for turning round by turns the axle tree or wimble. If any of them had been guilty of murder, adultery, theft, or other atrocious crime, it was imagined either that the fire would not kindle, or that it would be devoid of its usual virtue. So soon as any sparks were emitted by means of the violent friction, they applied a species of agaric which grows on old birch trees and is very combustible. This fire had the appearance of being immediately derived from heaven, and manifold were the virtues ascribed to it. They esteemed it a preservative against witchcraft, and a sovereign remedy against malignant diseases, both in the human species and in cattle, and by it the strongest poisons were supposed to have their nature changed. After kindling the bonfire with the tein eigen, the company prepared their victuals, and as soon as they had finished their meal, they amused themselves a while in singing and dancing round the fire. Towards the close of the entertainment, the person who officiated as master of the feast produced a large cake baked with eggs and scalloped round the edge, called ambonach betain, i.e., the Beltane cake. It was divided into a number of pieces, and distributed in great form to the company. There was one particular piece which whoever got was called Cailbec Beltane, i.e., the Beltane carline, a term of great reproach. Upon his being known, part of the company laid hold of him, and made a show of putting him into the fire. But the majority interposing, he was rescued. And in some places they laid him flat on the ground, making as if they would quarter him. Afterwards he was pelted with egg-shells, and retained the odious appellation during the whole year. And while the feast was fresh in people's memory, they affected to speak of the Cailleach Bealtaine as dead. In the parish of Callander, a beautiful district of western Perthshire, the Beltane custom was still in vogue towards the end of the 18th century. It has been described as follows by the parish minister of the time. Quote, "Upon the first day of May, which is called Beltan or Beltane Day, all the boys in a township or hamlet meet in the moors. They cut a table in the green sod of a round figure by casting a trench in the ground of such circumference as to hold the whole company. They kindle a fire and dress a repast of eggs and milk in the consistence of a custard. They knead a cake of oatmeal, which is toasted at the embers against a stone. After the custard is eaten up, they divide the cake into so many portions, as similar as possible to one another in size and shape, as there are persons in the company. They daub one of these portions all over with charcoal until it be perfectly black. They put all the bits of the cake into a bonnet. Every one, blindfold, draws out a portion. He who holds the bonnet is entitled to the last bit. Whoever draws the black bit is the devoted person, who is to be sacrificed to Baal, whose favour they mean to implore, in rendering the year productive of the sustenance of man and beast. There is little doubt of these inhuman sacrifices having been once offered in this country, as well as in the East, although they now pass from the act of sacrificing, and only compel the devoted person to leap 3 times through the flames with which the ceremonies of this festival are closed." Thomas Pennant, who travelled in Perthshire in the year 1769, tells us that, quote, "On the 1st of May, the herdsmen of every village hold their Beltane, a rural sacrifice. They cut a square trench on the ground, leaving the turf in the middle. On that they make a fire of wood, on which they dress a large caudle of eggs, butter, oatmeal, and milk, and bring besides the ingredients of the caudle plenty of beer and whiskey, for each of the company must contribute something. The rites begin with spilling some of the caudle on the ground by way of libation. On that every one takes a cake of oatmeal, upon which are raised 9 square knobs, each dedicated to some particular being, the supposed preserver of their flocks and herds, or to some particular animal, the real destroyer of them. Each person then turns his face to the fire, breaks off a knob, and flinging it over his shoulder says, 'This I give to thee, preserve thou my horses. This to thee, preserve thou my sheep,' and so on. After that, they use the same ceremony to the noxious animals. 'This I give to thee, O fox, spare thou my lambs. This to thee, O hooded crow. This to thee, O eagle.' When the ceremony is over, they dine on the caudle, and after the feast is finished, what is left is hid by 2 persons deputed for that purpose. But on the next Sunday they reassemble and finish the relics of the first entertainment." Another writer of the 18th century has described the Beltane festival as it was held in the parish of Lxii in Perthshire. He says, quote, "On the 1st of May, Old Style, a festival called Beltane is annually held there. It is chiefly celebrated by the cowherds, who assemble by scores in the fields, to dress a dinner for themselves of boiled milk and eggs. These dishes they eat with a sort of cake baked for the occasion, and having small lumps in the form of nipples raised all over the surface." In this last account no mention is made of bonfires, but they were probably lighted, for a contemporary writer informs us that in the parish of Kirkmichael, which adjoins the parish of Logeret on the east, the custom of lighting a fire in the fields and baking a consecrated cake on the 1st of May was not quite obsolete in his time. We may conjecture that the cake with knobs was formerly used for the purpose of determining who should be the Beltane Carline, or victim doomed to the flames. A trace of this custom survived, perhaps, in the custom of baking oatmeal cakes of a special kind and rolling them downhill about noon on the 1st of May, for it was thought